The heat in King's Landing felt like a hand upon Lord Eddard Stark's throat. It pressed without mercy, a damp palm of breath that never let him taste air without the flavor of tar and salt and a city's rot. From the Tower of the Hand, he watched the red roofs slump under afternoon brightness, the black ribbon of the Blackwater smoking with barge smuts, gulls wheeling like flecks of torn parchment above the masts. A fly crawled the length of the window frame and he did not swat it. Years in the north trained out of him the habit of wasting motion. In the south, he was learning that every motion had to be wasted twice to be understood. The note lay upon his desk. Nosil, a single line, written in a hand that could have been a learned maester's or a sellsword's careful imitation. Come to the Lantern Court at dusk and ask for the fig wine. Bring no guards. The last words were drawn with a casual flourish, as if no one with sense would bring guards to the Lantern Court. Lord Stark, Varys had murmured, soft as felt, when Ned showed him the parchment earlier. The city has many lanterns. Some are hung to light a path. Some are hung around a neck. Who keeps a lantern if there's nothing to see? Ned said. Varys fluttered fingers and lowered his eyes as if the matter were beneath fear. I am but a humble servant. If you go, perhaps you will see something that should not be seen. If you do not go, perhaps you will not see what must be seen. When dusk fell, the streets took on the color of watered wine. Ned walked with two men at his back, Jory Castle and Harwin, until the shadow of the Lantern Court swallowed them. There the lanterns had been lit and slung in garlands between balconies, glass panes painted in oranges and sea greens so that the courtyard world became an aquarium of murk and faces. It was a place where perfumes fought like knife men and laughed as they bled, where music drifted from behind screens and a boy in a feathered cape asked Ned if he wished to be reckoned younger for an hour. Ned waved his men to a tavern door and spoke low. I go in alone. If I don't return, tell no one where I went. You never followed me here. If I do return, you still never followed me here. Jory's mouth was a stubborn line. My lord, do as I say. Ned moved into the fog of music and sweat. A woman with lacquered hair and bruised plum lips leaned upon a lap as if she were made of water. A harp sang like a weeping child. Ned made for the corner table where a candle feathered its flame against a bottle. He did not sit. He stood as if he had found a sword leaning there and could not be sure whose it was. Fig wine, he told the serving girl. From the west or from the deeper west? She asked, with a tilt of the head older than she was. From where figs grow as sharp as teeth. She set a cup in front of him. Someone rose from the bench in the alcove. The man wore a plain brown cloak, no jewels. But his very stillness was a jewel you saw once and never forgot. His smile offered no teeth. So, the man said, the Honorable Wolf comes to a viper's nest because a spider whispered it would be interesting. I expected you to bring a dozen Northmen and set fire to the place. Ned had heard the voice in stories. He had never expected it to be so light. You asked for no guards. A test of ears, the man said, and of hands. Sit, Lord Stark. You and I have had a quarrel for many years without speaking. Ned said. He recognized him then, not the face. He had not seen the face, but the posture of mockery that a man wears when he has a better spear hidden under the table. Oberyn Martell, the Red Viper of Dorne, leaned one elbow against the wood and watched Ned with a leisure that felt like a blade drawn slow. I know your anger, Ned said, before Oberyn could say it and make it into a game. Your sister was murdered. Her children were murdered. No justice has been done. I was at King's Landing when Ares fell. I buried what I could. The rest is ash. Oberyn's smile thinned. Ash is what remains when men swear honor to kings and then to other kings until the kings become ash as well. Drink. It's good wine if you have never tasted figs that grew in the sun. Ned drank. It was sweet and slightly bitter, like a story that does not end. What do you want? He asked. To see if the stories of your honor have a limit in the shape of your sister's child. The words fell with such quiet that the candle seemed to sag with them. Ned stared down into the wine. The glass showed him his own face as if he were a stranger who had walked to the bottom of a well. "What do you think you know?" he said carefully, as if each sound was a step on a narrow stair with nothing beneath it. "Enough that the wind from the north smells different for a boy with a dire wolf," Oberyn said. "Enough that Jon Arryn's questions were not all of a single kind. Enough that I remember a girl from the north who came to a tourney and made a prince look at wind-blown hair as if it were a crown. Enough that I know how men lie when they are protecting something worth lying for." Ned closed his eyes, a heartbeat. He opened them. "Words like that can kill a boy. Then you and I must learn to use them to kill the men who would kill him," Oberyn said, and the smile vanished altogether. "We have a common enemy. The Lannisters will choke this city and then turn north to see if winter can be bribed. They took my sister. Their mountain broke her children. Your king is a boar with a crown. The queen is a lioness with a taste for blood. Their cub does not have a Baratheon's face. But you knew that already, and your honor has been scratching itself bloody wondering what to do." "What do you propose?" Ned asked. "Not a rebellion," Oberyn said. "The song of rebellion bores me. I propose a memory. The realm remembers. It remembers Harrenhal, it remembers the great council of old. When a boy's birth is a question that divides a kingdom, the lords have sat before and chosen. If the boy you are hiding is what you and I both think he is, then he does not need a rebellion. He needs a chair, and a voice to convince the realm to put him in it." Ned's mouth tasted of iron. "He is my sister's son," he said. "He is not a piece upon your board." "He is a board," Oberyn said. "He is a bridge thrown between north and south that no one suspects until they walk it. Tell me his true name, and I will tell you what it can buy." Silence pressed outward like hands upon the walls. Ned felt time like a cold stone in his fist. For 15 years he had hidden one truth under 1,000 ordinary truths, wrapped it in soot and snow and the syllable snow until he believed he had buried it under sound. Now he sat in a southern lantern court with music in the walls and a man whose eyes did not blink often enough, and the truth he had kept pulsed against his palm. "Jon," he said simply. "My sister named him Jon." "Lyanna chose a plain name," Oberyn said. "Or perhaps she chose a quiet name. Quiet names cut deepest when you discover what they hide." He rapped a knuckle against the table. "We will need more than a name to woo a realm. We will need proof that sets even Stannis Baratheon's jaw to listening. We will need witnesses who do not tremble." "Howland Reed was with me at the end," Ned said. "No one else. The men who were there died, and I killed some of them myself and will have to answer for that any way the gods choose. The child was born under a tower no longer standing. There was no septon, no high septon, no maester to put their names on a page. Then we will gather pages of a different kind," Oberyn said. "We will gather faces. The North's face, Dorne's face, a few clever tongues, a great council at Harrenhal perhaps, or Old Town if we wish the Citadel to bless our story. But first we must take your wolf cub from the wall before the Black Brothers bind him for life." Ned felt the sudden, hard pull of that tether. "He has not sworn yet," he said. "He writes of training and bruises. He has not taken his vows." "Then we have time," Oberyn said, rising. "Very little, which is my favorite flavor of time. I will return to Sunspear and set something slow in motion, which is my brother's favorite flavor of time. You will keep breathing until I need you. Try not to be arrested for treason in the meantime." That night, Ned sent 2 ravens, one to Castle Black, the other with a ciphered hand to a marsh that wandered. To Castle Black he wrote with a hand's authority and a father's brevity. "Jon, return to Winterfell at once by my command. Do not take vows. Trust only Maester Aemon and the Lord Commander with the reason for your haste." The marsh letter he inked in a pattern that only a frog-skinned knight would read without scorn. "Howland, I may do a thing that will drown and save us together. Bring grey water where I point if you can find me by the smell of my fear." On the 3rd day, the city's breath shifted. A hunt was proclaimed for the morrow, a boar and laughter and skin, and the king was as eager for it as he was for dawn ale. Ned stood with Renly under a lintel and watched Robert slap his own shoulder as if the fat there were a friend. "You look ill, Lord Stark," Renly said, careless, and then less careless when he saw Ned's face. "Will you be in the city when the hunt returns?" Ned asked. Renly's eyes flicked to the Queen's balcony. "I may have business south." Storm's End is suddenly interesting. "Take as much of the gold cloak's interest with you as you can," Ned said. "When the king returns, I fear there will be too much interest and too many cloaks left in the wrong hands." When the king returned, he was dying. Gored by a boar he had wanted to kiss with his spear, wine-drunk and memory-drunk and full of the old songs. He put his name to a parchment naming Ned as protector of the realm until his son came of age. He left his life to a chamber that smelled of lilies and funerals. Ned watched the Queen's eyes weigh a crown and find it too light to throw, watched Littlefinger weigh everything and smile at the weight of his own pockets. He sent another raven to the wall. The first had not yet returned with any answer. At Castle Black, the wind spent itself on crumbling stones and left silence. Jon Snow stood in the yard with a bruise along his ribs and Ghost silent at his side. The raven brought to Maester Aemon by a boy with a runny nose sat upon the old maester's hand as if upon a bough in a winter that never ended. Aemon's fingers were blue-veined roots. "My lord," Jon said, respectful but breathless. "You sent for me?" Aemon's clouded eyes seemed made of milk and pearl. "Your lord father has written," he said, and the word father made something in Jon's chest lift its head. "He asks you to return to Winterfell at once. He counsels you not to take the vows." Jeor Mormont, the Lord Commander, folded his arms. He had read the letter already. Jon watched the two old men more than the words. Ghost's ears tilted, as if the words themselves had assent. "Why?" Jon asked, half to the letter, half to Aemon. "Why would he? Why now?" Aemon stroked the raven's neck. "Your father asks that only I and the Lord Commander be told. He writes, 'A boy's life is about to be swallowed by men's oaths. Bring the boy to me before the men devour him.'" Jeor's lips tightened. "Damn his south," he muttered. "Damn their games. But your father is hand of the king. He holds the king's voice while the king breathes, and the king breathes yet. A recruit is not sworn until he speaks the words. If the king's hand calls a recruit back, I'll not break my head against that stone. Go, and be quick." Aemon's blind gaze turned almost toward Jon, almost through him. "The wall keeps who it can," he said. "It does not keep the snow itself when wind chooses. Go find your wind. But remember, some vows are taken even before they are spoken." Jon bowed. He did not understand that last, not truly, but he felt in it an older, deeper ice than the wall, and a warmth too, as if the old man had put a blanket of words on his shoulders that would not fall off. In the yard, Donal Noy saw Jon's bundle and grunted. "South, then. Watch your tongue and mind what you promise. Men down there like to hold you to anything that hurts." Samwell Tarly looked stricken and proud and held Jon's hands too long. Ghost pressed against Jon's thigh, unbothered, as if wolves knew the way before boys did. On the King's Road, the world was a long brown river. Jon rode with two of the Night's Watch Rangers to Molestown, and from there with a group of merchants who wanted the safety of a long-legged boy with a sword and a silent white wolf. The wolf scared away thieves. Jon's thoughts could not be scared away so easily. He had imagined the words at the heart tree when he would speak them, in the old god's hearing. He had imagined stepping out of boyhood with frost on his breath and his name shortened to just what he had done. Now he rode toward the south and did not know what name would wait for him. 3 days south of the Neck, they passed a line of riders in gray with ragged-edged banners stiff in the wind. A hunting party for men, not animals. Jon knew the sigil and felt the cold of home like a splash of water in his face. He turned his horse before he had given the thought permission and rode for the crow's-bearded man who led them. "Howland," Jon called, and the crannogman lifted his head as if hearing a bird he had taught to speak. Howland Reed's face was the color of wet bark, and his smile, when it came, made the lines around his eyes a map of marsh paths. He rode closer and looked at the boy and at Ghost, and something in his face softened into grief. "You have your aunt's eyes when you are not angry," Howland said. When you are angry, you have 10 people's eyes. You know me? Jon asked, surprised into a laugh. I am on my way to a man who knows you better than anyone, Howland said. We will ride together. The South has sharpened its knives again. In King's Landing, the knives turned. Cersei came to Ned with her children like a shield and let her rage be a mother's. Littlefinger came with defiance that bent the knee and then bit the ankle. Janos Slynt counted the gold cloaks as if he were counting gold. Pycelle coughed and smelled of old books that had been read only to look learned. Ned tried to be winter in a place that had forgotten the word. He wrote letters to Stannis Baratheon, the true heir, and was warned by Littlefinger that too much truth too loudly spoken would put his head upon a spike. He considered all the spikes in the city and wondered if there were one with his name. At night, he sat with parchment and a long memory. The Tower of Joy rose inside his head and fell again and again, and the bed there with the blood upon it seemed to him more honest than most thrones. The city heard the king die. Sound travels differently for news of that kind. The boy king sat a crown upon tawny hair, and the hound grinned with his burned face as if he had been promised meat. Ned gathered the city watch to his side, counting bribes he had not handed, and discovered his honor had enemies on both ends of their swords. In the throne room's huge air, with the smell of incense and old iron thick as soup, he read Robert's decree and spoke of regency and Stannis and the law. Cersei took the decree and made a smile with it. Littlefinger touched his dagger. Janos Slynt shouted, men shouted back, and the shouting became the language of spears. Jory Castle's last cry was the sound of someone seeing home through a door that would not open. They took Ned to the black cells. They left him there for a night and half of another, measuring the dark with his breath. The straw smelled of old sweat and old fear. When the door scraped again after that half-night, a single hooded figure stood there with a key in one hand and a knife in the other. The hood turned, and Ned smelled a spice under the damp, citrus and something like pepper. If we cannot win a city with words, we will steal one man, Oberyn Martell said, and the knife touched the bonds on Ned's wrists as if it loved them into parting. Stand quietly now. The dead are loud in these halls. 3 silent sisters were waiting where the corridor grew colder. They had a bier and a shroud. Ned lay down as if he were truly a corpse and let the shroud come over his face and let the breath go out of him until his body learned how not to show it was there. They carried him past a sleeping guard who turned in his chair because of some dream that would be a story with mortar and wine later. They carried him into the night and into a wagon whose wheels had been greased with lamb fat so they would speak only to the road. They carried him to the river where a small ship rose and fell like a chest under a slow sleeper and handed him aboard to a man with no hair and a scar like a crescent moon under his ear. Planky town, the man said, and the moonscar bent when he smiled. Then home. Dorne's coast smelled of heat that had not yet learned to burn, of olives and salt and something else. An herb Ned could not name but which made him think of women laughing. They rode under the water garden's latticed shade. Children splashed and shrieked in pools of carved stone under the eye of Prince Doran Martell, who watched joy like a chess player who has never had cause to distrust it. He sat in wheeled wicker with a cushion under his knees, and his hands folded the way priests fold theirs when they have nothing to say and less to answer. This is a long way to bring a man who should be dead, Doran said softly, after the gates had closed and the violets of shade held them all in one piece. Areo Hoda stood behind him with a long axe that was a piece of himself. Ilaria Sand leaned upon a pillar and read Ned the way one reads a story that might end badly. Nothing in the city turned the way it ought, Ned answered. I thought to keep the law between us and the Lannisters. They used the law to climb upon and then knock it down like a ladder. Our patience has always been slower than my brother's spears, Doran said. Oberyn tells me of a boy you hid. He tells me of a plan to show him to the sun. Oberyn grinned. Don't make it sound like some delicate child. If he has any of Lyanna's wind and Rhaegar's mind, he will bear more sun than most. Ned tasted the names in his mouth. Show him to the sun when clouds go away? He has never lived without a cloud. Doran's gaze moved from Ned to the mosaic at his feet with its swirl of blue, green, and thin gold. You protected a dragon under snow, he said. "Here we have protected our revenge under children laughing. If we remove either cover too quickly, the thing underneath bites us. Slowly, carefully, we will bring the boy here first. We will place bread in his hands and see if he eats like a prince or like a northern wolf." "How do you mean to fetch him?" Ilaria asked. "He is at the wall, and the wall does not melt for our wishes." "He is already on the road," Ned said, and the truth of that was a fire in his chest. "If ravens can be trusted, if wind can." "Wind can," Oberyn said. "Sometimes it blows promising smells." When Jon arrived at the planky town, the first thing he saw was not the sea but the river that pretended to be a road for ships. Flat brown water with planks running almost to the sea's mouth so fishermen could walk to their boats without getting their feet wet. The far sky was white with heat. The sea was a flat blade. Ghost took in the scents, wrinkled his muzzle at the salt as if it were an old joke, and sneezed. Jon's face was as pale as Ghost's fur under all that southern brightness, and his eyes took on the dark of someone who has planned a speech and discovers he cannot remember how it ends. "Welcome to the end of the world, Snow Cub," a deep voice said, and Jon turned to see a giant of a man with skin like old wood and a beard like horsehair dyed by the sun. Hoda did not smile. Jon thought he had never seen a man so still. He looked at the long axe on Hoda's back and thought for a heartbeat that he might have to kill a man like that someday for a reason he did not want. "I'm here by my father's command," Jon said. "Fathers make commands to hide the things they cannot ask," Areo said, and turned to lead him along the planks. In the water gardens, the warm, wet air was like breath from a sleeping creature. Children with curls and shining eyes ran and splashed. Women watched with the contentment of a day without grief. A few old men sat and argued about dates. Jon followed Hoda through corridors of stone made cool by trickling water and into a room where a man sat with gnarled hands upon his knees and a look like the shadow of a hill at sunset. "Ned Stark Ruus." The motion seemed to lift everything in the room a finger's breadth. "Jon," Ned said, and Jon heard the name as if it were the first time it had been said without snow on it. "Father," Jon said, and found his mouth dry, his stomach knotted. "What?" Ned crossed the floor in 3 steps and put his hands upon Jon's shoulders with a gentleness from some other season. "Before you say anything, hear me," he said, and then he did not speak for several heartbeats because what he was about to do was too heavy, and a man must arrange his strength the way he arranges firewood. "Your mother was my sister," he said. "Lyanna. She died in a tower of stone I have seen 1,000 times since. She made me promise to protect you. You are not my son in blood. But I named you son, and you are my son in truth." Ghost went very still. Jon felt a strange sway inside his ribs, like a small boat in a sudden unexpected current. His mouth wanted to ask a dozen questions that did not know which to push forward first. He wanted to run from the room before any word could catch him. He stood and let the tide come. "My mother," Jon said, because that word needed something to wear. "What was her name?" Ned's eyes did something that frightened Jon. They softened into a look he had never seen in them. "Her name was Lyanna," he said again, and then, "Your father was Rhaegar Targaryen. The tide was not water. It was sand collapsing. It was the ground itself remembering it had once been a sea." Jon forced air into his chest and felt it do almost nothing. "No," he said, as if the word could rewind time if spoken properly. "I'm Snow." "You are," Ned said. "You will always be Jon to me, but the blood in you, I cannot lie to you any longer. The lies I told were to protect you. The truth I tell now is to ask something terrible of you." Jon's legs betrayed him and he sat, though he had not seen a chair and did not know when the chair had chosen to be under him. Ghost leaned against him and exhaled, a sound of someone deciding to stay. Jon stared at the white wolf's ear, at a small notch in it from some training yard foolishness, and tried to make a shape in his mind that matched the words. "Why?" he asked, and then, "Why now?" "Because the realm is breaking," Ned said. "Robert is dead. Cersei holds the Boy King, who is no Baratheon. The Lannisters will tear down anything that does not bow. The North will not bow easily. the South will not be bullied. A war would burn a generation. Or a truth can be brought before a council of lords, with Dorne's voice and the North's voice speaking one name that is not Lannister. Your name, not for vengeance, for peace. Oberyn Martell's voice came from where he had leaned in the doorway like a story come to make mischief. And not just peace, for justice buried so deep in this city that the worms are fat with it. Jon looked at the Dornish prince as if seeing a creature from a fable. He looked at the dark-haired woman behind him with her mouth curved into an amused question. He looked at the man with the long axe who could have been a tree if he had decided to spend a season thus. He looked back at Ned. I took the road to the wall because I had nothing to ask of the world, Jon said. I cannot be this. You can, Oberyn said. You are. Even if you choose to maim your claim, it will limp along with you. Better to teach it to run in the direction you prefer. Lyanna loved you with a fierceness that would embarrass poets, Ned said softly. She would not have you die for my honor, nor live for my shame. She would have asked you to save people you do not know. It is an ugly thing to ask of a son. Jon touched Ghost's neck. The wolf's fur was summer-cool despite the heat. If I say no, he said, and he knew as he spoke that he wanted to test the word, to see if he could make it true by cutting it clean. What happens? Then I find another way to keep war from swallowing the North, Ned said. You go back to the wall. You speak your vows before a heart tree that will hear you more kindly than I ever have. You live your life among men who know which way the wind comes when death walks. And I go on lying until my lies break. And Dorne? Jon asked. Oberyn smiled with no humor. Dorne has been waiting for 3 men to die for a very long time. I will continue to wait and to train my spear. If you do not wish to be a king, the world will cough up another candidate. He will likely have worse manners. Jon tasted the shape of a future where he was not asked to be anything but himself. Tasted of cold and iron. Tasted honest. He tasted the other shape too. Tasted of ash and blood and water, surprisingly. The thought made him blink. A council, he said slowly. A gathering where men talk instead of kill. Has that ever worked? Once, Doran Martell said from his chair. Long ago, when dragons were still a problem rather than a memory. The Great Council chose a king to calm a quarrel. Can be done again. Not easily. But difficulty is a language we speak in this family. Family? Jon echoed, and the word twisted in his mouth, not unpleasantly. He looked at Ned. If I do this, you'll stand with me. Ned's answer was the first truly quick thing he had done in days. Always. And I will give you Dorne's spears, Doran said, a mildness in his tone that made the pledge bigger. On one condition, the mountain who rides must be brought to justice for Elia and her children. Not as a tournament jest. Truly, Jon did not need to imagine the mountain. He had heard the stories. Boys at Winterfell traded them like stolen coins. If he stands in the way of peace, Jon said, and surprised himself with the firmness in his voice. He dies. Oberyn's eyes warmed half a shade. I will write a ballad for you if you keep talking so practically. Do not write any ballads yet, Ned said. First we must reach the neck, then Greywater Watch. Howland's help will be needed to bring the North to heel without flaying it. Caitlin, Robb. His voice broke upon the names like a wave hitting an unexpected rock. They think me dead. I let them think it to move freely. That is a betrayal I will have to pay for, but the payment must wait. How do we move? Jon asked. Quietly, Doran said. Oberyn will travel with you as far as the Green Fork. Areo will leave shadows in your wake that look like footprints, so any pursuit will lose the scent. My daughter Arianne will go north by sea and make certain the Vale hears of your coming from lips it cannot ignore. We will write to White Harbor. Lord Manderley's cooks love the taste of a cause to feast. We will pluck a few other strings and hear which ones sing. Then, when the North is gathered and the Riverlands are listening, we will suggest a council. A council at Harrenhal, Oberyn said with relish. I like ghosts at my feasts. They went by night, because Dorne's days were too watched and the nights too kind to waste. Jon learned the shape of Oberyn Martell's stride, the way he set his feet like someone who had been taught to dance by enemies. He learned Ario's silence and Illyria's humming. He learned that Dornish wine had a way of speaking through your mouth if you were unwise with it. He learned that Ned slept little and watched the road the way a man watches a child who is too near a river. At the Bone Way, slow men with slow spears stepped aside when Ario Hota looked at them. At the Prince's Pass, a troop of Sellswords noticed Ghost before they noticed that the travelers were not the kind of men one stopped. By the time they reached the Green Fork, Jon's skin had learned a new color under the sun, and his mind had learned to hold two truths without bleeding too much. He was Jon Snow. He was someone else. They parted where the river broke into 1,000 glittering mouths. Oberyn clasped Jon's forearm and held it a heartbeat and then two. "Do not let the North chew you," he said, light as always but with a weight under it. "It has teeth sharper than ours and worse manners. Give my regards to your Crannog frog. Tell him I still owe him a story for one he told me 20 years ago in a tent by a lake no one else can find." Ario Hota bowed, which was more than most men ever received, and Illyria kissed Jon on both cheeks with a slanted smile that said, "Do not be too earnest to be charming." Ned and Jon rode north with 4 men in gray cloaks who looked like mist when they wished. Howland Reed met them where the air itself turned soft from the breath of the neck. His boats seemed to drift up from the mud on their own. "Come," Howland said. "This is where we stop being honest boys and become liars of a nicer kind." Greywater Watch made itself known when it pleased. This time it pleased. The hall was woven from willow and shadow. Its walls hung with skins that did not come from animals Jon could name. The fire was smoky and smelled of peat. At the far end, a rough map of the north lay pegged to wood. Rivers drawn in charcoal, keeps inked like old scars. Howland's daughter, Mira, stood at the map with a spear and a grin that made Jon think of Arya. A boy with hair the color of a pond's bottom looked at Jon without blinking, and Jon had the strange impression that the boy could count the number of heartbeats in the room without error. "Jojen," Howland said. "Mira, this is Jon. You've been many places lately without moving," the boy said dreamily, and Jon decided not to ask what that meant. He had other questions. "Robb," Jon asked Ned, the need in him like an ache he had not noticed until it was pressed. "He marches," Ned said. "He called the banners when word of my death came. He will come to us if we bait the river properly. He must not know I live, not until he stands inside these walls and the door closes. If the wrong ears learn I escaped the city, we lose our chance to bring the North into this without the Lannisters smelling it from Casterly Rock." They sent a message in a code that had grown between Catelyn and her father over years of needlework and war talk and keeping stubborn men alive. The words spoke of an illness that had a name only family would recognize. They set a place and a time that only the cautious would manage. Then they waited with the patience Ned had always practiced and never admired. Robb came at dusk with a dozen of his best and a map's worth of worry on his young face. He moved like his father except when he turned too quickly and almost tripped on a step he had not expected. Then he was all cat. Gray wind slipped into the hall before him, hackles up until he had made a circle and found Ghost by the fire. The dire wolves snuffed one another and then lay down with their paws touching. Howland took Robb's hilt as he passed, a courtesy that said, "We are safety because you are dear, not because you are weak." Robb looked around, not yet seeing his father because the mind doesn't look for the dead. When Ned stepped out from the shadow of a willow trunk that had been coaxed to grow indoors, Robb froze and then made a sound that turned into air. He crossed the space with a speed that seemed like a fall, and then he stopped with 6 inches between them because he was a lord now and because he had taught himself to be hard. Ned closed the distance. They came together like 2 halves of a door that had been stuck apart by winter. Neither spoke for a space of 10 heartbeats. Then Robb said, thickly, "They told us. They told us." "I let them," Ned said into his son's hair. "I let them for a purpose that is going to ask too much of you." He released Robb and stepped aside. "This is the first of too much. Listen to what I tell you and don't kill me where I stand. Jon is your cousin. He is Lyanna's son. His father was Rhaegar. I am going to ask that, when the time comes, you give your banners to him." Robb's eyes found Jon's, and they were the same eyes, stark gray set into different angles, into different stories. Jon felt his throat go dry again. He wanted Robb to laugh and punch him and ask where the real jest was. Robb did not laugh. He did not move. "It makes no sense," Robb said after a long pause that contained a year. "And it makes perfect sense. I loved him like a brother without knowing why it stung my mother to watch us. It was because gods." He put his palms to his eyes, hard enough to hurt. If he is what you say, then he is a danger to himself and to all of us if we hide him forever," Ned said. "But he can be a remedy if we are careful." Robb dropped his hands. He looked at Jon again. "Do you want this?" he asked, almost savage with the need to have someone else declare what must be done. "I don't know what I want," Jon breathed. "I know what I do not want. I do not want the Lannisters to make a crown into a collar on every neck in the realm." Robb stared, his jaw set. He looked down at the wolf by his boot as if gray wind might say something wise. When he looked up, something had hardened and also warmed in his expression. "If a council is called," Robb said slowly, "if the lords are gathered, if Stannis can be made to sit down without drawing his sword, then I would sooner lay my sword on your knee than on his. You're my brother. You always were, whatever we call it." "Cousin," Jon said, not gentle, not unkind. The word needed to be said at least once by each of them. "Brother?" Robb repeated stubbornly, and a breath of laughter went through the hall like a summer wind skittering dandelion seeds. Even Ned smiled. They spoke then for hours. They spoke of Manderley's appetite and what it could purchase. They spoke of the Boltons and Roose's quiet that made men's hackles rise. They spoke of the Karstarks and of the men Glover could rally. They spoke of the Riverlands and of Edmure Tully's pride and of Walder Frey's bridges and skin. They spoke of Riverrun and Catelyn and of how Cat would hear this truth and how the truth would scrape her. They spoke of Stannis upon Dragonstone with his iron claim and iron habit. Howland spoke most when others needed a map for a thought. Jojen spoke once, softly, when talk of councils and banners had grown too bright. "The winter is still coming," he said. Everyone looked at him as if he had grown a second head, and then they realized that what he had done was grow a second season. "It is not a word to frighten children. It is a thing that will eat men. Whoever wears a crown must learn to wear it like a warm hat only sometimes." It was near dawn when the plans had fixed themselves into shapes men could walk without tripping. They would call the North's lords to White Harbor under the excuse of weighing tariffs and telling jokes about Lannisport. They would whisper to the river lords that a council at Harrenhal could unmake a boy king without tearing 10,000 men. They would send a letter to Stannis acknowledging his claim and inviting him to present it before a council, with a line about law that would flatter him and a line about treason that would scald. They would coax the Vale with Arianne's charm and a reminder that the Eyrie loved to pretend it stood above war rather than in it. They would let Tywin Lannister think the North had knelt when in fact it had simply sat down to tie its bootlaces. White Harbor received them with smells of fish and the kind of ovens that make men forgive politics for an hour. Lord Wyman Manderley had a seat that made him look like a pastry. When he stood to greet Ned Stark, tears made bright tracks in the powdered sugar of his cheeks. He did not question that Ned lived. He merely called for more chairs and more pies. When Jon was introduced as a cousin returned safe from the edge of the world, Manderley kissed him on both cheeks and then whispered, "The sea knew you were coming. It is greedy for good stories." In the counting rooms, behind racks of dried cod and casks of wine from places Jon had only seen on maps, lords gathered and lowered their voices. They were not men to be moved by fables, but little things move big men. The honesty in Ned's eyes when he said a thing that could cost him every friend. The way Howland's small hands shaped the air when he spoke of a tower and a promise and a girl's fevered breath. The fact that the wealth of White Harbor stood ready to buy the finest singers in 3 cities, and yet Lord Wyman spent silver not on minstrels but on ravens. The North was not convinced. It had leaned forward to listen. That was enough for the first hour. Riverrun was harder. Edmure had the wounded pride of a young man whose river has been frightened and who must pretend he frightened it back. Catelyn arrived with fast horses and faster breath. When she saw Ned, she forgot the breath. She forgot everything that had ever practiced being a lady. She struck him across the face. The sound made the hound near the gate turn his head as if hearing a hunting horn. "You let me bury you," she said, each word a thread pulled bloody through her own mouth. "You let me stand before our children and hold them while they broke, and you watched from wherever you were hidden, and you did not come." Ned did not raise a hand. He did not defend himself. He did not go to her. She would have stepped away, and that would have been a worse pain than the pain of standing where he was. He said only at last, "I thought to save them with a lie, Cat. I may have been wrong. If I was wrong, I will spend the rest of my life paying for it. I would start paying now if you tell me how." Her eyes went to Jon then, perhaps because she needed a new wound. He had prepared for it. He had rehearsed in his head a dozen ways to stand and bow and wear humility like a shirt of mail. The look she gave him was old and new. It held fear and a relief so sharp it was a blade. As if something she had suspected all her life had been proven and therefore could no longer creep under doors. "Whose is he?" she asked, though she already knew from the way Ned's voice had changed saying his name. "Lioness," Ned said. Cat's hand tightened on the back of a chair until the wood creaked. She looked at Jon and did not look away. "I made you suffer for years," she said, her voice flat with honesty. "I made you pay for a sin you did not commit, because I wanted my husband to love me best, and I thought you were the weight that kept his love from rising. I am sorry." The words were awkward in her mouth. "I am sorry, and I am not finished being angry. I will try to be finished before I die. Until then, I will not pretend in front of you." Jon had not expected tears, not from himself. He lived among men who did not have time to cry because the ire breath was needed for running or cutting or laughing when their legs ached. The tears came anyway, hot not with grief but with the humiliation of having to swallow years in one mouthful. He bent his head. "Thank you, Lady Stark," he said. That is more than I deserve." "Perhaps," she said, "but my measure has never been fair with you, and it is time I tried to repair it." They took Riverrun's oath not to war but to attend. That was the best one could wring from men who had seen their fields trampled and their sons stuck with flags. In the Vale, Lisa read Arianne's letter and stroked its paper as if it had been written on silk made from her own hair. Peter Baelish balanced the letter on 2 fingers and smiled at a point on the wall above it. In King's Landing, Cersei threw a wine cup against a wall when told that a council was being whispered of, and the stain on stone looked afterward like a map of 2 kingdoms drawing together. Stannis Baratheon replied to Ned's invitation with a letter so stiff it could have been carried north by a plank. He would come, he wrote, with men whose boots had never learned the habit of turning around. He would present the law. He would listen to claims as a favor to the realm which he pitted. He would accept a verdict that was true. A single sentence near the end pried Ned's mouth into a grim line that almost became a smile. "I remember the great council that chose a king when the law could not choose. I do not admire it, but I do not forget it." Tywin Lannister gathered men and money. He gathered them and let them sit, because he was not a man who spent anything quickly. He sent a small force near Harrenhal as if to test the ground, as one pokes a meat pie with a finger to see if the crust will hold steam or bleed gravy. He summoned Gregor Clegane to him and told the mountain to keep his sword near the hilt. The mountain grinned in his slack-faced way that looked like a child remembering a game with knives. Harrenhal's towers saw fires that were not made by dragons for the first time in years. Men pitched tents in the fields where ghosts had never grown tired of walking. The hall was too large. It made men feel their words were small and should be shouted to matter. Under those ribs of blackened stone, the lords assembled. They were a mosaic of grudges. Manderly's hunger and Hoster Tully's illness and Blackwood pride and Bracken's suspicion and Royce iron and Yohn's earnestness and Vance desperation and Piper humor and Derry bitterness and Fry arithmetic, which counted daughters, bridges, insults, and bellies. From the Stormlands came men who wore their loyalty to Stannis like a hair shirt they were proud of. From the Reach came very few. It was a long way to travel to watch Northerners argue with a Baratheon and a Martell. From the Crownlands came only a thin knot of houses that were tired of red and gold. Stannis stood beneath a banner without a stag. He would not bear the crowned stag while a false king sat the Iron Throne. He looked as if he had been carved from pine and then left in the weather for a winter too many. He looked like a man who had never liked a joke and had decided long ago not to start. Beside him stood a man with a smuggler's hands and honest eyes. Davos Seaworth looked at Jon with the frank curiosity of a man measuring a tide. Doran Martell did not come. He sent Oberyn. The Red Viper's smile put an itch under the tongues of men who disliked snakes and found themselves wondering if they had something in their boots. Arianne watched from a gallery with a shawl that seemed to trickle sunlight. Areo stood at her back like a tree moving only in the wind. From the north came Robb with Great John Umber making loud agreements and louder threats by way of greeting, and Roose Bolton with his eyes the color of somewhere a knife had already been. Catelyn sat not far behind Ned, her mouth a scar of effort. Howland Reed took his place without fanfare, looking like a man who had wandered in from catching frogs and had accidentally found himself in the center of a story. The hall murmured itself quiet when Ned rose. He turned his head slowly, as if he were looking at a landscape he loved and trying to find where to put a house that would not ruin the view. He spoke plain. He told them he had protected a child at great cost. He told them who the child was. He told them how he knew. He did not embellish. He let the room feel the lack of show, and it felt it. When he was done, he stepped back and waited without letting his hands clench. "Howland Reed," he said then, and the small man stepped forward and made the hall grow smaller with him, as if he had pressed the edges inward by a foot on all sides. He spoke of a tower and a room with sunlight like a fever and lioness hair on a pillow, and a prince whose sword had sung while it killed, and the way a promise can put a chain on a man's heart. He did not weep until he spoke the name of the midwife who had washed the child, a woman no one in that hall had ever heard of, but whose name fell like a pebble into still water and made rings. Stannis spoke next, because a man like Stannis could never wait to be called. "The law is the law," he said, his voice as dry as paper. "If the boy is the son of Rhaegar and Lyanna, and if Rhaegar set aside his marriage to Elia for one with Lyanna." He let silence show what he thought of that. "Then the boy's claim may be strong. If there was no marriage, then he is a bastard twice over. The Great Council would need to consider whether the realm wishes to prefer a Targaryen bastard to a Baratheon rightful heir." His mouth did not move with the last words. They felt like iron filings arranged by a magnet. "Your rightful heir is a child of incest," Oberyn Martell said lazily. "Shall we ask Maester Pycelle to bring his chains and demonstrate how all the dark-haired seed in that precious book of his ended up blonde at once? Or shall we trust the evidence of anyone's eyes? I will trust even a Northman's eyes in this." Great John barked a laugh that made banners stir. Roose Bolton smiled faintly, which was more dangerous than laughter. Wyman Manderly licked fat from his lip and spoke to the air. "If we must choose between a Lannister's grandson and a Targaryen son raised by a Stark, I know which cooks I'd trust." "The kitchens are not where this is decided," Stannis snapped, and then, because Davos leaned slightly, and Stannis listened when Davos leaned, which made him almost human, Stannis added, "But the North's stomach matters if we mean to keep the North in the realm." Catelyn rose before she knew she was doing it. "We can speak of law until our throats bleed," she said, and men turned because grief has its own authority. "We can pile proofs like stones. But look at the cost of not choosing the right man. Houses fall. Children starve. Men such as Clegane are let loose. Choose the man who will be hardest to own, and we will own our lives a little longer." Stannis's eyes flickered, a quick blink that some would call annoyance and Davos would later call thought. He looked at Jon. Jon had not spoken. He had stood and felt the hall's weight on him and found that the weight did not crush so much as concentrate. He had thought through the nights about what he would say. He had torn those speeches to shreds himself in his head. Now, with the lords watching him, with a crown that had not yet been offered sitting somewhere in the air like a hawk that might stoop, he said quietly, "I will not promise to be loved. I will not promise to rule gently. I will promise to listen, even when I hate what I hear. I will promise to put men between women and children and any knife, no matter whose hand holds it." and I will not make bargains with the truth. If I am chosen, I will bring justice to those who have murdered for power. I will start with Gregor Clegane. Then I will work my way up. A sound moved through the hall that was not applause and not quite a growl. It was men deciding which way their blood flowing felt like a vote. Great John raised his sword. The boy speaks like winter. I want winter. I want someone the lions cannot buy and the snakes cannot charm and the dragons cannot burn. I say him. Roose Bolton's voice was silk over a pit. I care little for pretty speeches. I care for survival. The Lannisters will fight a Targaryen at our head with the fury of men who fear losing their gold. But they will fight a Baratheon with the cold calculation of men who think they can buy him later. I prefer to die cleanly if I must die. The boy then, Stannis's jaw worked. He had not wanted to prefer anyone. He wanted the law to set him like a sword on the throne. He looked at Jon as if the boy were a puzzle with too many pieces that nonetheless made a picture that looked like a wall. If the council chooses you, he said, biting off each word, you will swear to uphold the law, not rewrite it to suit your mercy. I will swear to uphold the truth, Jon said, meeting his gaze. You may serve as my right hand in that. The hall laughed, some genuinely, some because laughter is armor. Stannis's face went whiter than white, then flushed a dull brick. Davos's mouth did the smallest thing a mouth can do to be a smile without being a mistake. You might do worse, Lord, he murmured. The votes came like stones set upon a pile. One by one, Lord spoke, some with effort, some as if they had been waiting for the chance to side against the Lannisters in a way that did not require marching their sons to a meat grinder. The River Lords spoke with the memory of smoke in their hair. The North's men spoke with that bluntness that is really a form of tenderness. The Stormland's men looked to Stannis, and Stannis said nothing and then said, "Do as you will," which they had been doing since they were born anyway. The Reach's few present abstained. They're abstaining a message to Oldtown and Highgarden both. We will not stop this, but we will not own it if it fails. The Vale's envoy, a thin man with a pleasant mouth and the smell of sweet fruit about him, announced that Lady Lisa would abide by the council's wisdom because the Eyrie liked anything that happened below it. When the tally was done, no one shouted. Harrenhal's hall did not like shouting. A sound like wind filled the space again. Jon felt the weight shift from his shoulders to his bones. Ned stepped forward with a circlet of black iron chased with a single line of rubies, thin, dark stones that looked like dried blood drops. Dorne had sent the rubies. The iron came from a smith in Winterfell who had never made a crown and swore he would never again. When Ned set it upon Jon's hair, it felt both too heavy and too honest. "Jon of Houses Stark and Targaryen," Ned said, his voice not quite steady and therefore steadier than it had ever been. "The council calls you king of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the First Men. If you would be king, kneel to the realm and swear to serve it. If you would not, hand me back the iron." Jon knelt. The stone flagged his knee with a pain that felt like a signature. "I swear," he said, "to serve, to protect, to judge without fear and without purchase. To hold the North in one hand and the South in the other and not let either strangle the other. To remember winter, to seek peace before war, justice before mercy when the two cannot be married, and mercy before vengeance when they can." He rose into a future that would hate him or save him. He could not tell which, and that ignorance felt cleaner than knowing and being wrong. They did not let a week pass before they broke a peace from the promise and went to war. War, but a small war. A knife's war, not a hammer's. Gregor Clegane rode with 50 men toward a village near the God's Eye that had the misfortune of growing wheat in a season that wanted other growth. Oberyn Martell and 100 men who had learned the spear the way other boys learn lullabies went to meet him. Jon did not forbid Oberyn. He would not have been obeyed. He sent Howland's men to sow shadows and Robb's best riders to encircle. He rode too, because a king who does not taste the metal of his own orders is a drunk. They found Clegane's men in the first light, fires small and sullen, horses stomping flies. The mountain was not subtle. Oberyn was. He came like thorn vines slipping over a stone. The first cries were not from men but from horses, which offended Jon and heartened him. It meant surprise favored his side. He rode through a small chaos while Ghost ran like a coil of spring released and ripped a man's calf out from under him. Jon's sword found mail, then the seam under it. He killed as little as he could, which meant he killed more than he wanted. Gregor Clegane saw Oberyn when they were near enough to smell one another. The mountain laughed, a grunt, and leveled his great sword. Oberyn's spear glittered. They came together like two different stories told in the same room. The first pass left a gouge in the mountain's pauldron, a kiss of iron. The second took a piece of the spear's tip and turned it into sunlight. The third pass, Oberyn fainted low, and then he did not faint. He was low, legs like ropes, and the spear came up under the rim of Gregor's breastplate, where men who think themselves gods forget that their bodies have throats. It punched so deep that Oberyn's hands almost met at the mountain's spine. Gregor clawed for the shaft. Oberyn twisted, and something tore with a sound like a green branch breaking. The mountain made a noise that turned the air inside out. He swung slower. The sword bit earth and then Oberyn's shoulder. A shallow bite that cut but did not cripple. Oberyn stepped in and drove the spear once more. Higher. There are ways to kill a boar and ways to kill a man who is a boar. Oberyn knew both. Gregor fell. The ground thumped with a feeling that went up Jon's legs and made him want to kneel by instinct to the old gods that lived under soil. "Justice for Elia?" Oberyn said, panting, and bared his teeth at the sky as if it had owed him something and had finally tossed it down. They sent Gregor's head to King's Landing with a note that said merely, "For your Hall of Skulls." The messenger never reached the Red Keep. Varys saw to that. Instead, the head arrived in a square before a bakery where small folk could see it and decide for themselves what it meant that a mountain had fallen. It meant, in short, that mountains could be climbed. Tywin Lannister began to move in the way a glacier moves when a summer insists. He sent gold into the Vale. He sent promises into the Reach. He sent knives very small and a host very large to wring Harrenhal and pinch it like a thumb on a bladder. Jon called the Riverlords up and they came. He called the North's hard men and they came. He called Stannis and Stannis came with a face like a brick that had fallen in a well. In Harrenhal's shadow, a camp city grew with the speed of plague. Fires lit the night like a second sky. Men sang because they were frightened. Men sharpened because they were practical. Before the first real clash, Tyrion Lannister rode into Jon's camp under a flag that he waved himself as if the gesture needed humor to live. He wore a red cloak for courage and a smile for armor. The Sellswords eyed him the way men eye a cake that might be poisoned but smells too sweet. He was brought before Jon and Ned and Robb, and his eyes did a quick dance from one face to the next and returned to Jon's as if they had found something that appealed. "My sister calls you traitor," Tyrion said cheerfully. "My father calls you problem. I call you interesting. Interesting men are rare and often dead. I prefer the rare to the dead. What do you want?" Jon asked, a question that had become a tool he trusted. "Something my family cannot give me because they do not know how to give anything," Tyrion said, and then, "A city that does not burn to announce its new occupants. You have a snake who loves fire on your side. We have a queen who loves it more. Between them, King's Landing would be a rumor told by fishermen. I propose we prevent that." "How?" Ned asked. He had grown to respect this small man despite himself, or perhaps because Tyrion reminded him of a squirrel that had learned arithmetic. Impossible and therefore entertaining. "I know the way into the Red Keep that does not require permission from the men who enjoy refusing permission," Tyrion said. "I know which of the gold cloaks will turn their cloaks without being paid twice. I know which gate will swing without squeals if it is oiled with the right oil. If we move quickly, we can put your new king in the throne room before my sister finds her wildfire." Oberyn looked disappointed but amused. "You wish to steal me a city after I stole you a man," he said. "Fair." They moved on a night when the moon had decided to be a coin for a beggar, thin and mean. Tyrion led a column of men whose boots knew how to be polite on stone. Jon wore no crown. He wore mail and the north smell and a calm that was not entirely real. Ghost slipped ahead and then behind, a white thought weaving between darker ones. Ned moved with him, hand forgetting to ache around a sword hilt. In the tunnels under the hill, water ran in voices that sounded like gossip. At the postern gate, a man with sleepy eyes and a scar on his cheek held a lantern up and then lowered it. He took a purse from Tyrion with an expression that suggested this was the first honest work he had done in weeks. Inside, the Red Keep was a stack of silent rooms that remembered screaming. They climbed a stair that narrowed and narrowed until Jon felt the stone press his shoulders and imagined the keep was trying to swallow him. When they came out near Maegor's Holdfast, they saw light and heard two voices, one careful and one angry. Cersei stood with a goblet in her hand like a scepter and a smile that might once have got her everything she wanted. Jaime Lannister stood with one hand and a face that had learned more than it liked to know. For a heartbeat, no one moved. For another, everyone moved. Steel came out of scabbards with the sound that had made kings since iron was invented. Guards turned toward the noise and then turned toward the purse Tyrion had handed their friend. Half chose coin, half chose habit. In the first rush, Oberyn broke a man's wrist so neatly the man looked puzzled before he screamed. Ned held two men off at once and kicked a third down 3 steps without wasting a breath. Jaime Lannister's sword, in his left hand, moved like someone trying to learn a song in a language his mouth had never made. He was still dangerous in a way most men are not even when healthy. Jon's blade met his with a ring and slid. They traded a flurry that felt like a conversation both understood even through accent. "King," Jaime said, a breathless courtesy. "How dull for you." "Sire," Jon said. "How dull for you to have to learn." Jaime's mouth twitched. He did not hate Jon. He did not have time to decide whom he hated. He parried a cut that would have kissed his ear. Then a shout turned both their heads. Cersei had a torch. She threw it at a tapestry that had been soaked with some careful liquid. Flame ran up that woven scene as if it were a story eager to happen. Tyrion swore. "Wildfire," he said, like a prayer and a curse. He dived for the wall and dragged down a sconce and stubbed a torch end into a bucket that had been prepared with sand. Jon broke from Jaime with a motion that would have been rude in a dance and went for the tapestry. He tore the bottom down with a slash and smothered fire with the whole of himself, cloak and arms and the willingness to burn if it kept others from burning. Ghost leapt and snapped at the running fire as if it were a living thing. The flames died with the sullen sound of a drunk falling asleep. "Boring," Oberyn observed, breathless, "but effective." Cersei saw something in Jon's face in that moment that did not involve him. Something under the crown, under the sword, under even the name. Something that looked like a man who would not give her the pleasure of hating him in the way she liked. She threw her goblet. Wine scattered like blood. She ran. Jaime did not follow her. He lowered his blade and let it hang in his tired left hand. He said to Jon, quietly, "Save the realm, then." "I'm trying," Jon said. They took the Red Keep with less blood than any song would ever credit. Tyrion led them to the throne room by a passage that smelled of old secrets. The Iron Throne waited like a trap designed by a madman and a drunk who had not been given enough nails. Jon did not go to it. He stood on the black stone of the floor and let the room make him smaller or bigger as it chose. Lords and men with names and men without names entered and stopped and made choices in the pause between breaths. Ned came to his son, his nephew, and put a hand on his shoulder that shook for the first time since the Tower of Joy. "Sit," he said, and only that, because the rest had been said already, and some things are weakened by repetition. Jon climbed the iron steps. He felt the chair's points through his mail. He sat. He did not grip the arms. He did not lean back as if he were tired of his body. He sat like a man who had just stood and had not yet learned how to be a king except by deciding each small thing until a shape emerged. He looked out over the hall and saw Sansa walking in with her head high and a bruise faded to the color of old violets upon her chin. She saw him, froze, then moved forward like a queen whose feet are still those of a girl. She curtsied. Her eyes shone with a kind of pride that seemed to embarrass her. Arya came in behind her like a cat brought indoors, wild and not ashamed to be wild. She did not curtsy. She grinned. Jon felt tears and swallowed them because he needed the salt for later. "Justice," he said when the room stilled. Not later. Now. He had Cersei brought back into the hall. She had been found at the sept, praying in a voice that made even the gods want to look away. She walked like a lioness, pretending the desert was not a trap. Jaime stood to one side, face blank. Tyrion leaned against a pillar as if exhausted by the very concept of family. Varys watched from a shadow that he had obviously measured out beforehand to fit his entire body plus 2 secrets. "You killed the realm's peace," Jon said to Cersei when she was brought before him. Not loudly, not cruelly. "You put your children where they could be torn. You set men at one another with a smile. For that, I sentence you to confinement in a tower by the sea. You will have food and water and a septon who will not be bullied. You will watch ships come and go. You will write letters you do not know if I read. You will live long. Mercy is not a gift to you. It is a gift to those who might have died for your public death." Cersei stared. She had expected fire, axe, roar. She had expected an ending that matched her drama. This quiet, this room with air in it, offended her worse than humiliation. She spat. The spittle fell short. "You are your father's son," she said, and then looked confused, because she had meant sarcasm and found the line poisonous in her own mouth. "My father is a man who kept a promise for 15 years, Jon said. "I hope to be his son." He turned. "As for the rest, Tywin Lannister will return to Casterly Rock and be held there by my men until this council's decrees are made law by quill and blood. Ser Jaime Lannister will return to the Kingsguard and protect the people of this city, or we will find a man who will. The mountain is dead. Ser Amory Lorch will be hunted and hanged when found. Pycelle." He let his gaze rest on the maester who had sweated through his chains. Wilby asked his resignation with a firm hand. "Stannis," Davos asked from the side, not out of turn because Stannis would have asked but could not decide whether to ask without making it sound like begging. "You will sit my right hand in law," Jon said to Stannis. "You will be hard where I am weak and unbending where I am tempted. You will also ride north when the season turns to ice and see what the wall is keeping from us. Bring grain to the watch. Bring iron to the hands there. Bring your eyes to the idea that we are a broom in front of a door that is going to open." Stannis's mouth did a thing no one had seen in years. It tried to smile and gave up halfway, then attempted again and settled for a grim approval. "I will serve," he said, as if each word were being weighed and then accepted into the treasury. "Dorn?" Oberyn asked, laughter under his question like a spring under a plank. "What do we get? Beyond the pleasure of watching you vex lions." "Dorn gets what it asked for," Jon said. "Justice, and a marriage if it wishes, not as a chain, as a bridge." Arian Martell descended the gallery steps like a woman who had decided many things already and had come to see if any of them would be contradicted. She looked Jon over as if he were a horse she might buy, smiled slightly when she saw his discomfort at being examined, and said, "I do not wear a chain. I do not marry for anyone's flag. But I can be convinced by an idea, if it is beautiful and stubborn." "Like you," Oberyn murmured, and Ariohota stared somewhere in the middle distance and pretended not to hear. "We will speak," Jon said, with a humility that did not sound like weakness. And so they began to make a realm out of ruin. It was not a song, not even the kind of song where the bard is paid to forget verses about famine and women with empty breasts. It was work. Jon rose before dawn and met with a guard captain who had been honest for 15 years without anyone noticing and made him a lord. He sent bread to places where men had not seen bread in weeks. He sat with Tyrion and drew him maps of the kind of city that could survive a bad king and a good winter, and Tyrion drew devils in the margins and made practical improvements. He listened to Varys with one ear and had the other ear on the walkways where gossip lived, and every now and then he caught Varys in a small lie and let the man see that he had. He let Sansa teach him how to read the faces at court, how to hear who was sleeping with whom by listening to what color a lady chose for her sleeves. He let Arya show him where the city hid children with gray eyes and quick hands. He took counsel from Ned until the old instincts in both of them had found new grooves. Winter moved south by inches under the feet of ravens. In the north, White Harbor's ovens were lit night and day, baking and baking and baking for the wall. Manderley made songs of loaves and made his banners look better for it. At Castle Black, Jeor Mormont received casks of grain and piles of iron and a letter in Jon's hand saying, "I will stand between you and the world that forgets you." Aemon smiled and put his finger on the words and said a name very soft, and no one heard it. In Sunspear, Doran watched the children at the water gardens and let his pain sit with him on the bench and be what it was. He wrote letters in a small hand that said big things without bragging. Oberyn drilled the sand snakes until they cursed him and then laughed through their curses. Arianne and Jon walked the Red Keep's terraces when she came north, not arm in arm like a pair that had already agreed upon a poem, but not at sword's length either. She asked him if the north had fruit at all. He told her of winter apples that kept, and the sweet when you bite one in cold air that makes your mouth steam. She told him of figs that taste like the sun if you split them with your thumb. Between them, a bridge grew that looked like two people speaking and not like a treaty written by a tired quill. Stannis rode north in late autumn with Davos and a train of carts that creaked with honor. He stood upon the wall and looked out at a dark line on the horizon that did not move. "You are right," he wrote Jon. "There is something out there. The law will not hold it. We must." Tywin Lannister did not bend. He cracked. He retreated to Casterly Rock and found it less comfortable when gold began to buy less song and more sword. He wrote, polite and venomous, and received replies polite and negligent. He sent assassins and watched them not return. He sent envoys and watched them drink northern ale and decide to stay where the air did not smell like coins that had been handled too many times. He learned, as old men do not like to learn, that patience belongs to his enemies now. When the first snow fell in King's Landing in a flurry that made small folk put out their tongues to catch it, Arya danced in the yard until she slipped and laughed at herself. Sansa caught flakes on her lashes and blinked them away like crystals of mercy. Jon stood at a window that had once framed a different boy and let the cold make his breath a visible promise. Ned came and stood beside him and said nothing at first, because men like them have always trafficked in silence when it mattered. "You did not want this," Ned said at length. "I do not know what I wanted," Jon answered. "I wanted to serve and to be seen. I suppose I am seeing and being seen more than is good for anyone." "You kept your promise," Ned said, "even when you didn't speak it." Jon looked down at the courtyard where Arya was teaching a baker's boy to hold a stick as if it were a real sword. Ghost lay under a stair, making the snow around him steam a little. "We will keep more," Jon said. "We will try, at least." Ned's hand came to his shoulder again, light and heavy at once. "That is what kings are for. That is what fathers are for." On the last night of the year, when the sea had become glass except where the Blackwater moved like a creature under a skin, Jon walked the ramparts alone and remembered a yard of black ice and a promise he had not spoken because it had been eaten by a raven and turned into a different shape. He breathed and watched his breath go away. He thought of a tower falling and of a girl's hand upon his father's wrist and of a prince's face that he knew only from other men's anger. He thought of a woman with eyes like sunlight through wine who laughed when he fumbled and argued when he was too hard. He thought of Stannis on a wall of ice and of Davos warming his hands at a fire that would need more wood than men knew how to cut. He thought of Oberyn's spear finding a place no man is more armored than another. He thought of Tywin sitting in a stone seat that did not warm to him. He whispered then, not to gods he had learned to distrust, but to two ghosts he carried in his bones. Lyanna, Rhaegar. He did not ask their permission. He told them what he would do. In the morning, a boy ran up the tower steps 2 at a time with a face full of red. He held out a paper as if it were a fish he had caught that might yet bite. Jon took it and read only the first line and felt the cold become a person. From the wall, riders sighted in the far north, not wildlings. He closed his eyes a heartbeat and opened them. The city under his gaze did not change. Men went about their business and women wrapped scarves around their hair and ships made little mistakes and corrected them. Somewhere in the kitchens, a cook cursed because a pie had burned. Somewhere in the alleys, a child found a coin and did not tell anyone. Somewhere in the halls behind him, Sansa practiced speaking to lords until she could do it without wanting to be ill. Arya pretended the world was a practice yard. Ned read a letter from the north and traced the shape of Kat's name with his thumb. Jon folded the paper and slid it into his belt. He walked down to the yard and found Tyrion already waiting with that expression that meant trouble had arrived, wearing a hat and a smile. He found Stannis appearing as if conjured by a syllable of duty. He found Oberyn leaning his spear against his shoulder and grinning, as if someone had just told him that a boring time had ended. He found Arryn with her shawl around her shoulders, red against the first dusting of snow. He found Ned. He said, "We will ride." And the word was not a question and not an order. It was a promise. It was Winter's verb. It was a king's simple truth. They went to work. They drew maps and redrew them because paper likes to lie. They sent ravens and men and carts and hope north, farther north, to where the world forgot itself. They took the throne and made it not an end but a seat to rise from. The crown on Jon's head felt like iron and like the hand of a father and like the promise of a boy who had almost taken other vows. He listened when he wanted to speak. He spoke when silence would have been easier. He bent when bending saved children and stood straight when bending would have broken men. In quiet moments, he sat with Ned and spoke of Greywater Watch and of a girl who danced with a broom and of a boy who never learned to sew straight. They did not speak often of the Tower of Joy. It did not need saying. The promise walked beside them in daylight and lay at their feet at night like a white wolf. The realm breathed in and out. Snow fell and then rose as water and fell again. The council members argued, loved, betrayed, were buried. Tywin Lannister died in his chair, of something no one could buy a cure for. Cersei watched the sea and cursed and drew names on paper and tore them up. Stannis wrote laws with a hand that made even mercy look stern. Davos fed children and taught a prince to laugh and thought sometimes of onions and then refused to think of them because he had become a man who did not need old symbols. Arryn learned to hold her tongue and then unlearned that, and between the two things she found a voice people wanted to heed. Oberyn found more work and more joy and then found a wound he confessed to enjoying because it meant he had not grown too bored to bleed. And to the north, beyond the places even crannogmen map in their sleep, something walked. It walked as winter walks, with patience and with the lack of curiosity of a knife. When it came at last to places where men still thought their breath belonged to them, Jon was there. When it opened its mouth, the sound it made was not a language. Jon answered anyway, with iron and fire and the fact of people standing together who would have stood apart if not for a promise made in a tower and fulfilled in a throne room and kept on a wall of old ice. He did not know if the gods heard. He did not care. He kept his word.